Welcome, everybody, to the only podcast, NCAA Tournament Edition. This is Chris Vanini, your host, and I'm joined by Austin Smith. Got your name right.
Yes, you did.
Co-managing editor of the Only Colors. And Austin, how are you doing? And this is an exciting time of year now. Now it really starts, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's March, baby. I'm in a great mood. We've been working, we've been approaching this whole time of year with such trepidation for the past couple months.
Right. Does it feel good to finally get there?
Yeah. This has been such a different season. There just aren't many of these that come around, and we're lucky in that regard as Michigan State alums, fans, whatever, in that you don't have to sit on that bubble very often. And it's been an interesting season because there was never, you never really felt comfortable until the very end. And even on Sunday, I felt pretty good going into the show. And then they showed I know we'll get into it later, but they showed Wisconsin was an 8 seed. And I immediately went from Twitter straight to my TV to watch the selection show because I was like, oh boy, if Wisconsin's all the way down in 8,
right?
I think MSU, good team.
Yeah, I think MSU fans and Northwestern fans probably got a little nervous after.
Yeah,
seeing that, but
I can't even imagine what they were doing.
Was there a point this season where you thought they weren't going to get in, MSU?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think let me look at the schedule. I'm going to pull it up because there were a couple points during the regular season where I was
when they lost to Purdue at home. When they lost to Purdue at home, they were 12-9.
Yep. Yeah. Oh yeah. I think coming out of that, we talked about it, that there was that next stretch where they played Michigan twice, Nebraska, Iowa, Ohio State, and they needed to win.
They had to win the games. They won one.
Right.
They won 6 of 8, and they lost the 2 by a combined 40 points.
Yep.
But they got the wins that they needed.
Yeah, I think after they beat Wisconsin, you had to feel pretty good. Although losing both of those two, it made it. They didn't make it easy on the fans or themselves. So but there was definitely a point. I think that's a good indicator right there. Where after Purdue, I was a little nervous, and then after Northeastern, you had to be a little apprehensive. They were 7-5, no Bridges. You didn't know when he was going to be back, so that was nerve-wracking.
And they had kind of struggled against Tennessee Tech. They got past Florida Gulf Coast barely.
Beat Oral Roberts by 4. I mean,
got blown out by Duke and Kentucky and Baylor.
You know what? I will say, I think the most scared I was at any point during the season was the first game of the Big Ten at Minnesota in what turned out to be arguably the biggest win of the year. One of certainly the biggest ones in retrospect.
Yeah.
No Bridges. They're, Spartans are starting off Big Ten. You're just looking to right that ship. And they're down, 10-15 in the second half, and you're watching it all slip away. And, sitting there would have been 8-6 with no surefire wins outside of maybe 2 or 3 on the schedule. So that was probably the most nervous I was at any point during the regular season.
Yeah, I think that was probably up there too. So before we get into NCAA tournament, actually, did the winter storm hit you in Chicago?
Oh yeah, we got smoked. There's a good, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches probably on the ground just down here in the Loop alone. I woke up this morning and it was like we were in the middle of a blizzard. It was crazy. But now it's kind of stopped. I think it's supposed to all go away after the weekend. But yeah, it came out of nowhere.
Man, I woke up today and it was 45 degrees.
Oh gosh, I'm crying for you up here.
It was tough. It's difficult because it's really hard because you wake up and it's cold. And you kind of do long sleeve pants, sweatshirt. And then by the time 2 o'clock comes around, it's 60 outside, and then you got to change your clothes. And
I just feel so bad for you. I got to say, just so much pity in my voice. I'm sure
it's difficult. So
yeah.
So I kind of miss snow. I miss enjoying snow, but I don't miss dealing with snow.
Yeah. I wouldn't miss it if I were you. It's everywhere here now. So I think they just waited. Winter just decided to wait until, the middle of March this year, which is a very Chicago thing to happen.
I was curious. I mean, it doesn't look like it's too many problems. I was wondering if it's going to affect the NCAA tournament travel. It's already delayed some NIT games.
Oh wow!
that start earlier. So
That's crazy. I didn't know
it
that.
seems to be okay. I don't think I'm going up to Tulsa. It's about 4.5 hour drive, and
Oh yeah.
I mean, I could. It could. I mean, it's close. Tickets are kind of expensive because MSU is in the same, obviously, part as Kansas. So Kansas fans are driving the price up on that one.
Now, if they win, would you consider going if they're going to play Kansas?
If they win, they play Sunday.
Right.
Maybe. I guess I'd have to look at it. Wife's gonna.
I hope you run into that issue.
Well, maybe not. Well, my wife's gonna be gone this weekend, so I gotta take care of all the dogs.
Oh, jeez.
Which
Throw them in the car.
Which, by the way, if you hear some barking on this podcast, it means she probably got home from work. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of up in the air about that. I'm curious. I guess Ducking Delvon noted that MSU's never played in the state of Oklahoma before.
Really?
Which I found interesting, and they're 1-5 on St. Patrick's Day.
That's not as fun of a fact. I don't like that one nearly as much.
I remember the 2008 Big Ten tournament when they lost to Wisconsin. That was my freshman year at MSU. I remember watching it at a house party during the day. But
yeah. Okay.
So football. We're gonna get a quick football thing in here before we move on to basketball. The sexual assault investigation continues to be ongoing. More evidence shared between the investigators and the police department. Still no update on any idea when that's going to kind of move forward. But it does bring a question of the state of the spring game, which is, as of this Saturday, it'll be 2 weeks away. And I think it was Kyle Austin and for MLive wrote that they don't really know what's kind of up with that yet, if it'll be open to the public or media, or because they know, if you put the team out there, people are going to note which players aren't there, and that'll kind of, by process of elimination, you figure out who maybe the 3 players involved in this, which I think it was the Lansing State Journal or the Free Press said that they've chosen not. The paper has chosen not to identify the players because no one's been charged, which makes sense in this situation. Any thoughts on that? I'm kind of, obviously they've been in the dark for a long time, and Antonio Reilly's statement, kind of out of nowhere, and they're just kind of really, really going. They're
slow playing this about it as they're going full media blackout. They're slow playing it as hard as you can. I think they're going to have to make a decision here soon. I mean, they're really not going to have much of a choice, because you're reaching a point of critical mass where you either – I think it'd be a really bad look if they closed the spring game and chose not to televise it, which is what they've done. It's been wildly entertaining. I mean, it's bad football, but it's cool to see the young guys out there and actually get some football back in our lives, usually in the spring. But if they decide to go full closeout there, that would concern me a bit. Like, I've been okay personally with D'Antonio making, limited comments, not really giving the press as much access, under the guise of protecting the kids. And just in case they, if nothing happened, you don't want to drag somebody's name through the mud just for the sake of media access. Like, I don't really believe that that's fair to the kid when nothing has been legally proven. But it's going to be tough to, I don't know. I feel like in a way it'll be tough to defend if they really just shut the entire thing down. Because at some point you have to approach the subject. You have to talk about it. It can't be something that just sits in the shadows for a long time. Now, today I did see that they submitted final evidence or something to the police department. So I think things might be wrapped up, or there may be some final evidence here in the next 2 weeks that happens before the spring game, in which case I would expect some resolution to be brought to the issue. But they're reaching a point where they're going to have to make a decision, and I hope they're transparent. But at the same time, at this point, it's hard to tell whether they're going to be or not based on how they've handled the
Yeah.
situation.
I mean, you hope they're transparent in the end. I think, you know, the fact that the way they've reacted to it tells me that they're treating it with absolute seriousness.
Absolutely.
Not putting, you know, certain things ahead of, you know, legal issues.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, there's decisions to be made, but I mean, in terms of BTN televising it, I think David Harns noted there's a sponsor for it.
Yep.
A lot of stuff that's not obviously not as important, but just in terms of a decision probably has to be made soon, whether or not they go about doing that. But yeah, you know, even if the last evidence is there, that, you know, they got to charge, they got to have hearings, trial. There's still a lot that could go. And if MSU is not going to do anything until after the entire thing has played out,
well, yeah.
I'm no lawyer, but I feel like that's going to take longer than 2 weeks.
Yes, I would have to agree with you. I think if they get charged, then the kids are, you know, that's when you take real action one way or the other as a university. But it's going to be, like you said, there's still a lot of them.
They've got their Title IX investigation going on too, and that's a kind of investigation that led to the suspension of some Minnesota players,
right?
Despite not being charged. So there's a lot of stuff that has to go on there. I'm finding it very doubtful that they will televise the spring game because based on how they've approached it so far. So that's just my thoughts on that. And we'll continue to see how it plays out, and obviously hope that, you know, the proper actions are taken and whatever, you know, justice needs to be served is done. And until we know more, still not a ton to say about it so far, but that's where that is. So moving on to basketball, last time we talked was pre-Big Ten tournament. MSU goes out, whoops Penn State, kind of fully cements their bid to the tournament, and loses a close one to Minnesota that they were kind of trailing by a little bit for most of the way. I think they got up by one or tied it sort of down the stretch, but then gave up the lead and never really was able to get back into it. The guards had an incredibly terrible game. Across the board.
Probably their worst of the season.
Yeah, I mean, Ellis 1 for 2 shooting, Nairn 2 for 6, Winston 0 for 1, McQuaid 2 for 9. The team went 6 for 30 from deep as a team. Kind of a game where Minnesota's length, which had been a problem for MSU all year, despite winning 2 games, I think caught up to them. I think the guards had really tough time getting good shots off, moving, passing, and all that stuff. What did you think of the Minnesota game?
Yeah, I think the length played into it big time when Michigan State was trying to score.
And Minnesota's big. Minnesota's big on the perimeter, especially. It's not like a Purdue where they got
two giants
2
in
big
the
guys
middle,
inside, and it averages out. I mean, they're big on the perimeter, and that's for smaller guys like Winston and
I think it clearly bothered the guards. I do want to give I do want to give the guards a nod though, because we've knocked the perimeter defense all year, but this is the 3rd straight game against Minnesota where they did a really good job against Nate Mason. He had a terrible game. He went 2 of 14 from the field, only scored 10 points. The difference maker in this one was Reggie Lynch. He had not been. I don't remember him jumping off the page a whole lot at all in the first 2 games, and he had a day. His stat line 16 and 4 doesn't look incredible. His 5 blocks were really good, but he was just so active. I felt like he was doing a great job defensively on Nick Ward. And I felt like he really did a good job. And Jordan Murphy bounced back. He had that 121 rebound game against MSU the first time out, and then kind of fell back to earth when they came to East Lansing. But he had a double-double, 10 points, 13 boards. It wasn't that different from any of the other Michigan State games. It kind of felt a little like Illinois and Maryland all over again, where it was keep it close, but make too many dumb mistakes and miss your open opportunities down the stretch. I mean, Bridges put up 11 threes in this game, which is just, and I know he's a good 3-point shooter normally, but that's too many.
2 for 11.
2 for 11. Yeah,
he took 20 shots. That's more than a third of MSU shots as a team.
Yeah. And when the rest of the guards aren't hitting shots, that's not really a huge issue for me that he's taking the bulk of the shots. I mean, at this point, he's easily the best offensive option, but 11 threes, a lot of them being those quick trigger shots where you just feel like he's settling.
And that's the situation where I wonder if the length came into play. It was more difficult for him to drive. It was more difficult for him to post up.
I would think so.
And, actually, some MSU did well. They rebounded 19.
Tons of offense.
They rebounded pretty well on the offensive glass. Ward had 7. Ellis had 4. They had 19 as a team compared to 24 defensive rebounds for Minnesota. So that was they did, okay inside. They shot, 13 for 28 on twos. Not great, but not horrible. It was the outside shooting that.
This is the team. This is a game that if they had one guard going, if one guy was hitting shots in this game besides Bridges, who didn't even shoot very well, they would have won this game by. I mean, they only lost by 5 and had just a horrendous shooting performance.
Yeah.
If McQuaid can hit a few, he went 2 for 7. All of his looks came pretty naturally though. Ahrens 0 for 2 from deep, Winston 0 for 1. And Winston didn't play a whole lot in the second half because he tweaked his ankle, which I think was a really big deal.
Yeah.
You've seen it time and time again this season. The difference between him and Tum Tum Nairn is it's light years offensively. Nairn is basically a non-entity on the offensive end when you're in a set, whereas Winston creates those easy looks. I don't know how much of a difference it would have made if the shooters just can't knock him down, but at least he's creating probably easier opportunities and maybe negating some of that length with his passing abilities. So the fact he was out for the majority of he only played 12 minutes in the game. So that was a big blow, I think, in this one.
Yeah, and that's kind of along those lines. So something I want to talk about next, and that is Izzo's usage of Winston and Ward. And I guess if Winston was hurt, it's it's different. But Nick Ward played 20 minutes. He scored 15 points and he had 11 rebounds, and he was not in foul trouble. So it's 2 games in a row. Well, 2 out of 3 games now. The Illinois game, or 2 out of 4. The Illinois game and the Minnesota game were late in the game, close game. They didn't have him in. And I guess they did against Maryland, and he kind of fumbled that ball out late. But strange to not have him in, especially when you're trailing. I know Graham Couch wrote about it after the Minnesota game, and the coaches basically said, Ward isn't as good at defending screens or maybe even setting screens, or maybe not as good defensively. Which is, I'm not going to disagree with that, but when you're down 4 with a minute left, you need points.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why Ward doesn't play as much as he does.
Yeah.
He's only played more than 25 minutes. I think like once or twice since early January.
It's really
yeah, go ahead.
It does speak because in a way, this is an egregious example. I could not agree with you more. I think in a way it really speaks to Izzo's just general philosophy towards his rotation this year, because Nick Ward and Joshua Langford, both don't see nearly the minutes that they should see for as offensively talented as they are. In my opinion,
Langford, are you talking Langford or Winston? Because Langford, Langford I can sort of agree with because he's been real bad defensively.
Sure,
but. And he's not. He hasn't put up what Nick Ward is, but Nick Ward is consistently MSU's second best player.
Yeah, no, I agree. He is obviously a much more egregious example of this, but I think in general it just sort of speaks towards Izzo's his desire to. He knows this team is never going to be a well-oiled offensive machine, so he defers to the upperclassmen who he knows will at least compete on defense, whereas Langford just doesn't compete that hard on defense. Winston is a bit of a defensive liability right now. Ward, he is constantly riding Ward for his inability to kind of defend the pick and roll, really. I think in general, Izzo is going to always side on the side of the upperclassmen because, frankly, he hasn't had a team like this very often in the past, where his best players are clearly his youngest. But this particular example with Ward, I thought was just really bad. Now, you could be cynical or a tinfoil hat guy and think, oh, Tom Izzo in the Big Ten tournament.
I know.
I'm just saying. That's not what I thought you were going to say. Oh, no. I was saying he could say that, he sat Ward down the stretch because he doesn't really care if he loses this game or not. He'd rather prove a point.
I thought you were going to say he hasn't played Ward as much because he doesn't want Ward to leave early.
No. That
was the conspiracy theory with Deontay Davis last year.
Yeah, I don't think Nick Ward's going anywhere. As good as he's been, he's still 6'8" with no jumper.
Right.
I'm sorry.
He's not DJ Wilson. He's not DJ Wilson at Michigan, which has all the measurables.
Sure.
You can see the ceiling is much higher.
It's about how you translate to the next level. Nick Ward doesn't translate to the pros in any capacity beyond. He's not getting drafted this year before the end of the second round, whereas he could stay for 3 years and be a great player. I don't subscribe to that at all. I think that conspiracy theory. I'm just saying Izzo's never been shy about tossing games to prove points.
No, it was brought up to me. That's why I thought that's where you were go with that. It's here's the thing on Ward. So it comes down to basically is the defensive. Kenny Goins, Kenny Goins is okay defensively. Like he's not great. I mean, he was a walk on. He's not
6'6".
He is what he is. Is the drop off from Ward to Goins defensively so great to make up for the gap offensively?
It's not. It's clearly not.
No, Ward is number 1 nationally in fouls drawn per 40 minutes.
And he's shooting at 70% in the last stretch of games. Like he's been a good free throw shooter recently.
And free throw, and he makes 58% of his twos. He's number 1 in the country in offensive rebounding percentage. He's number 202 in defensive rebounding, and he's number 45 in block percentage. So there is some defense in there, but he's just such a weapon offensively on a team that does not have many of them. Does Izzo think he's maybe not in conditioned well, and that's why his minutes have been down? Maybe. I don't know everything that's going on in the program, but for him to play 20 minutes and Kenny Goins to play 19
seems crazy.
In a game like this where Ward was unstoppable, it just doesn't seem right. And
it seems to me too that sorry, go ahead.
Well, there was a play at the end of Illinois and Minnesota, which I haven't checked the replay. I don't know if they're the same exact play, but there was a situation where I think they were down 4 or 5 with about a minute left, and I think it's out of a timeout. It's a Miles Bridges 3. In Illinois, he made it. Against Minnesota, he didn't. I don't know if it was the same play or not, but a similar situation, similar play. And Ward wasn't in there for either of those. And maybe that's because he wanted going to set the screen or something, but I just feel like the offensive rebounding ability and everything else that Ward brings, he needs to play more minutes. And now you're possibly down to a 1-game season.
Yeah.
I don't see how holding him back at this point does any good.
I mean, I don't see how holding him back for the last 10, 15 games would have done any good. I think it's about Izzo. I think, again, kind of goes back to the teams he's used to having. He's used to being able to teach those lessons. I think at some point, I mean, it has to be now, or it's literally never going to happen this year. He just has to accept that what he's got is flawed. And he needs to I'm trying to think of the best way to put it, but you just got to play your best players for better or worse. They're not going to be great defensively. Langford's not going to be great defensively. Winston, especially hobbled, is not going to be great defensively. Ward's going to have his struggles. But those 3 guys, especially Nick Ward, are your 3 of your 4 most offensively talented players. You just got to ride or die. Like at this point, this is it. This is the hand you've been dealt. Take it, put your best guys on the floor, and hope for the best. You cannot have Kenny Goins playing down the stretch of a critical game like that. And now, especially if there's a close game from here on out, It's going to be coming against a pretty damn good team in a moment where your season will be on the line. Kenny Goins cannot be in the game unless Nick Ward either can't walk or has fouled out down the stretch, to me.
And kind of along those lines, last year with Deontay Davis and him not playing down the stretch, I don't think it was people pointed to that after the Middle Tennessee game, but that's not
Davis.
A reason. That wasn't a reason they lost. I think Davis was very flawed offensively. I don't think the drop off from Davis to Wallenman was as much as it was to a senior Wallenman as it is from Nick Ward to Goins. Now I think it's a lot bigger gap now, honestly, because Wallenman was a bigger guy. He had, and he was a senior and all that stuff. So he had a bigger role and could play that role better. So and Winston is number two nationally in assist rate. His assist rate is higher than Denzel Valentine's was last year. Now his turnover rate is a lot worse, but it's not worse than freshman year Denzel Valentine. And Denzel Valentine got a lot better at that every year. So it's very the ceiling is the roof for Cassius Winston.
That's a fact.
But I agree with you. I think in this game you have to put your best guys out there and let them go. I do think that for the long term, Izzo's strategy this year helps the team in the long term, meaning in future years. You could make a case he hasn't put the team in the best position for this year.
I think there's a lot of years where you can actually make that case, but I think a lot of the time he does it on purpose. Like with those crazy schedules at the beginning of the year, he's not putting his team in the best position to win at the moment. He messes with his rotations constantly, and I think he does it to put his team through adversity. I don't think that's necessarily different per se. It's just the personality he has on this team. It's not a team that another coach who hasn't been doing that for 20 years, 22 years, whatever it is, would do. If somebody had their job on the line this year and was coaching this Michigan State team, you better believe Kyle Ahrens wouldn't have played. Matt McQuaid probably would have seen the bench full time. They would have gone with a 7-man rotation, ridden the freshman into the ground, and just hoped for the best. But because Izzo is Tom Izzo and has that clout and has done this before with young teams, and it's worked out, paid beautiful dividends down the line. I think you're right. I think he's clearly had the future in mind because he expects, most of these guys are coming back next year, really. Bridges is the biggest wild card, but I think everybody else that really has gotten consistent minutes, that's not a senior. So Ellis is coming back. So I think you're onto something there with him looking to the future as much as he is looking at the present.
Miles Bridges could have gone to a school where he got the ball every time and just got to do whatever he wanted with it. But I do think Izzo has helped his long-term development this year. And I think Izzo always does that with the way he plays the freshman. And you look at a guy like Gary Harris, who's now stayed a second year and is now pretty good in the NBA.
Really good in the NBA.
Took a few years, and I think that helped in the long term with him. And is Nick Ward could Nick Ward get more? Yes. Does the way Izzo coach him this year, is it going to pay off for Ward next year or the year after? Yeah, probably. But I think now, at this point, the tournament.
You're in the tournament.
I think you
There's
have to
no future to worry about.
Right. There's going to be another one that, if it comes into play, 2 fouls to the bench, don't do that. Because I'm never a huge fan of that anyway, although Ward does commit 5.7 fouls per 40, so he is foul prone. But I'm never a big fan of the auto bench, but especially in a situation like this, you have to risk it. You're not going to win, you're not going to advance in this tournament playing it safe, especially in the position that MSU is in.
Totally. I couldn't agree more.
So MSU comes in at a 9 seed. Seemed a little bit higher than some people expected, to play Miami in Tulsa. And if they win, they play Kansas. The game is Friday, around 9:15 Eastern on TNT.
Yep.
I think. For those interested. Initial thoughts on the seeding and where they landed, just kind of aside from the Miami preview yet. Thoughts on getting a 9 and
it's higher than I expected. I was honestly a little sort of hoping they would get a 10, frankly, because I
was going to say, do you think that would you rather have had a 10?
Yeah, I think in a vacuum, yes, I think having a 10 would be great. Although I have to say the top 8 seeds, as they should be in this field in particular, I'm not sure they would have been in a better position necessarily as a 10. Not necessarily because of the 7 seeds, but the 2 seeds are just loaded. I mean, Louisville, Duke, Arizona, and Kentucky. Like, you can't really tell me
three of those teams beat MSU this year.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And you can't really convince me that those teams are, demonstrably worse than Villanova, Kansas, UNC, and Gonzaga. Actually, if you were to just saying them out loud, I would have thought the 2 seed was the 2 line was the 1 line, just based on kind of who they are. But I think they ended up in a pretty decent spot. I do think it's fun it kind of occurred to me on that night, Sunday night watching the show, just to take a step back and think about how spoiled and lucky Michigan State fans are. The fact that they've made it 20 straight years, and we're sitting over here. I was literally sweating during the show before the pick happened, and then they flashed to Northwestern, who just got an 8 seed and just got in. They just made the dance, and they are losing their minds. Now, granted, yes, it's the first time ever, but just put that into perspective, how incredible of a run this is for Michigan State. So I think that's just more of a big picture thing. I just thought that was really cool. It speaks to how successful this team has been and how kind of for granted we almost take.
Well, I mean, MSU teams are remembered for how they do in the tournament. That's it. I mean, I guess you could say the 2007 team maybe is remembered for Drew Neitzel beating Wisconsin, but other than that, which was also last time they were 9 that year, weren't they?
Yeah, they lost to Marquette, right?
Yeah, no, they beat Marquette. They beat Tom Crean and Marquette. Then they lost to North Carolina, but they took North Carolina pretty close down to the end.
I forgot about.
But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Red Wings and Stanley Cups. If you win the Stanley Cup, people remember that team. If you're MSU, if you make the Final Four, people remember that team. If you don't, you're kind of forgotten, really.
Yeah, I mean, we remember fun Sweet 16, Elite 8 runs, sure, but you made 7 Final Fours.
No one remembers anything about losing to Duke and Louisville in the Sweet 16 in back-to-back years. No one remembers
being really disappointed and upset that Austin Rivers friggin' beat the Spartans. That's what I remember.
Seth Curry.
Was it Seth Curry? Yeah, you're right. Oh man. Ugh, gross. Oh my god.
Yeah, and or just getting demolished by Memphis that one year. That's it. And you wait till next year. So this year's team is I'm gonna say they're not gonna reach the Final Four.
Wow. But, going out on a limb there.
So I think this year's team will probably be remembered for how they do in the future. Basically, I mean,
this year's team in particular is going to be remembered for Miles Bridges.
And
Nick Ward.
This was a transitional year. Maybe I mean, you kind of think of who was the guy in left after 2002?
Marcus Taylor.
Marcus Taylor, yeah. Kind of a similar.
Yeah,
in terms of a guy who was really good and then left in that spot all his.
It's been a funny year because when we're coming into this year, throughout the process, throughout the year of last year, I caught myself thinking, and since this has happened, I've retrained my brain to never think this way again. Of thinking next year is the year.
Right, I remember that. I remember saying early in last year, I was like, no, you've got a senior Valentine and a senior Costello and a senior Forbes here. Everybody's looking at the shiny freshman thinking that's going to be the year. No, that's the year. And I think last year's team was probably you could say it was his second best team.
Absolutely. I don't think that's a stretch at all.
And so people got all caught up in the freshmen, and
I mean,
Izzo was surprised. I mean, if you add Schilling and Ben Carter and
if you had Deontay Davis,
and
think
add
about where
Deontay
you were halfway
Davis,
through last year, and Josh Jackson. I mean, the treasure trove was, and it felt so tangible. It all felt so real. So that taught me to never think that way ever.
Right. So you're right. Don't take the present for granted for what you think will be there in the future. Because now, although I will say, at this point in time, you can look forward to next year probably.
Yeah, I think maybe we should go against our own word with that. But they so evolved, because last year it was, oh my gosh, this could be the best team in the country. You've got Josh Jackson, you've got Deontay Davis, Gavin Schilling, and then even before this year, even when Jackson goes to Kansas, even when Deontay Davis, declares for the draft, you still think, all right, you've still got Gavin Schilling coming back, you've still got these other freshmen, you've still got a transfer. Maybe Aaron Harris takes a step forward. You're still talking, I was still talking about this team as a Big Ten championship contender if it were all together.
They were number they were number 14 in KenPom to start the year. So in that sense, you can make the case it's a disappointment. But I think part of that is the fact that they lost those two big guys and they have nothing in the middle.
Yeah, 100%.
They were never going to overcome that. If you put Schilling, Carter, and Deontay Davis on this teteam, no, you probably don't have the Nick Ward breakout, but I think you have a much better team.
Well, even without Deontay Davis, even if it's just Schilling and Carter, it's all you can almost say, even with 10 fouls and a more concrete rotation,
I think you win a couple more games.
I think you're a 23, 24, 25 type of win team. I think you're flirting with the top of the Big Ten, especially in a down year in the conference, and you're somewhere around that classic Michigan State 3 through 5 seed where they always seem to end up.
It wasn't like they went from losing a star player to a reserve player in the middle. They went from something to nothing.
Right.
In the middle. There's nothing there in the middle anymore.
Yeah. They then lost Aaron Harris. I mean, it's really the fact that they are where they are. I know for Michigan State, seeing 19 wins at the end of a season is really strange, and you can't construe it any other way than a disappointment. But if you just look at where this team has come from the day that the tournament was announced a year ago to right now, everything they've gone through in that past calendar year, the fact that they're still sitting here with a single-digit seed, that's pretty impressive. I don't know that it's going to go down as one of Izzo's best jobs. I don't think it should, but by any stretch. But it is still impressive and kind of speaks to the.
It's an accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small one. It's a very small feather in the cap, an extremely small. You will not even see the feather next to all of the other big feathers that Izzo's got in his cap. But
they hit the minimum. They didn't. It wasn't a disaster.
Yeah, not a disaster.
It wasn't
after football season. Are we really going to complain about not a disaster?
Right. So so let's actually get into that game now. Miami comes in at number 32 in KenPom, an 8 seed, a team that, on first glance is pretty similar to Minnesota. They're pretty long. They're pretty good defensively, but not as good as Minnesota. They're not great in any one thing. I don't think they have any bad losses. They have a couple of good wins. It's a toss-up game that KenPom has Miami by 1. It's one of those games that's kind of right down. Austin, you're, I assume, going to write the preview and have looked at the Hurricanes so far. What were your initial thoughts on Miami?
I think in terms of roster construction, Minnesota is a pretty good comparison. They have a lot of perimeter length. They only have, I think it's 3 guys on the entire roster under 6'5", which is pretty crazy. 2 of them play a lot there, but they're 6'2" and 6'3" guards. One of them comes off the bench. It's Viljasevic or something like that. I can't remember how to pronounce his last name. But for all of that length that they have on the perimeter, their best player, House, is 6'6". One of their best freshmen is 6'5". They have a lot of that shooting guard through power forward length, but they only really have 2 pure, quote unquote, pure bigs that are 6'10" and above. And they're the 2 guys in their 8-man rotation that play the least. So as across the board of, as much length as they have across the board, it's not an overly big team. I think where Michigan State's going to struggle the most is defending as they have all season, defending the perimeter in that length. But that's some of the personnel. We'll touch on that more in a second. But in terms of team, they're almost in a way like a quintessential 8 seed in that you just sort of slap them in the middle because they're not that good and they're not that bad. Or I should say they're extremely volatile. Their highs are as high as it gets. I mean, they beat North Carolina. They beat Duke. They beat Virginia. I mean, you can stack those 3 wins up with a lot of teams that have got top 3, 4 seeds. That's pretty damn good. But then the losses, and I bet you this is why KenPom likes them, is there's a lot of them, but none of them are that bad. They lost 11 games. Only one of them was to a non-tournament team, and that was Syracuse, who was the first seed, literally was the last team out of the tournament. So, right. I mean, look, if you go down, it's really an impressive. If you can say it's an impressive list of losses, it really is.
It's like, I mean, in a sense, it's like it's similar to MSU. I mean, if you take out if you take out the Northeastern, the teams that missed were Ohio State and Penn State and Illinois. But Illinois was close, so none of those were, and all those were on the road. None of those were bad losses, but also MSU. But the difference is MSU didn't have the big wins either.
But it's even stronger. I mean, their MSU's resume kind of on steroids a little bit, because even if you take Syracuse out, their next worst loss is Virginia Tech, who is a 9 seed like Michigan State.
Wake
Forest too. Yeah, Wake Forest too. Yeah. Every other team besides those 2 is at least a 5 seed. I mean, that's 8 of your 11 losses are to 5 seeds. Now, the margin that they lost was pretty significant, though. Like they got waxed by North Carolina in the ACC tournament. They lost by 15 to Syracuse, 12 to Duke, 17 to Wake Forest,
18 to Iowa State, or 19 to Iowa State.
Yeah, so it's not what they lost to Florida by 9. So they're kind of a tough team to peg on statistical profile. They don't score the ball, or they have not been scoring the ball very well at all down the stretch, which I really think could end up playing into Michigan State's hand. Now, given they have played a really tough stretch, but
here's how they finished: 53 points against North Carolina, 62 against Syracuse, 66 against Florida State,
57.
Oh, I'm sorry, 57 against Florida State, 61 against Virginia Tech, 55 against Duke in a win, 54 against Virginia in a win, which obviously they play a better style. So it's been, I mean, they haven't cracked 70 in 5-6 games.
They don't shoot the ball very well from the outside at all. They only have 2 guys. I think it was 2 guys that shot over 100 threes in general on the entire year.
Well, they are right. They are number 338 in tempo. It's a team that plays
slow.
They play it slow. It's not a Wisconsin, Virginia type of style, but they take their time. They're not running up and down with you. And number 325 in average possession length on offense. So offensively, they're pretty average. They're 68th in efficiency, but that's because they turn the ball over. They're 145th in shooting, 132 from 3, 149 from 2, 120 at the free throw line. So not great at any one thing offensively. Yeah. They're pretty good. They're pretty good offensive rebounding. They get about a third of their misses, top 50, but they turn it over. They're number 243 in turnover rate. So
it's hard to figure out what they do all that. Like you said, they don't really do anything all that well. And the fact that they run that slowly and don't have what you would call, a true post presence. I mean, Kamari Murphy, one of their seniors, 6'8", is a 7.7 rebound a game type guy, but they don't have a real post threat. So they're running a lot of offense and they're still taking jumpers, and it doesn't seem like they take a lot of threes. So it might be, and like you said, they turn the ball over a lot. So it might be kind of like a messy, this could be an ugly offensive game.
Yeah, they are 263rd in 3-point ratio to 32% of their shots are threes, which is number 263 in the country. So no, they don't take a lot of threes, and they're not big on assists either. 269th in assist rate.
They
get a lot more of their points inside than.
So they just go to the basket.
More of their buckets inside than outside, I guess.
Yeah, they get them all out of like their typical offense, and they go to the basket. I mean, that's just it.
I mean, but even that, they don't get to the free throw line very much. They're number 212 in getting to the free throw line. So
they're a tough team to peg, really.
Not,
they're really a bit of an enigma. I think what strikes me as what's going to be tough for MSU is, like I said, guarding that perimeter size. I mean, Devon Reed, and they have a lot of seniors. Three of their four best seniors and upperclassmen. Three of their four best players, Devon Reed, Bruce, I think it's Bruce Brown. Devon Reed, Jaquan Newton, and Kamari Murphy are all upperclassmen. Devon Reed's a senior, kind of like their do-it-all guy, averages 15, 5 and 2.5.
Yeah.
How are they in turnover? Do they turn their opponents over a lot?
Not really. 192. So defensively, they're not great at any one thing except for kind of preventing their opponent from getting to the free throw line. I mean, they're 73rd in 3-point defense, 56th in 2-point defense, 322nd in free throw defense. Opponents just happen to make their free throws. Again, it's not an actual stat, but they're 88th. They're 88th in blocks and 76th in steals. It's another kind of slow pace type of deal. So again, but they're 20th overall in efficiency. So it's not. Again, it's not like it's not like they're going to force the turnovers, they're 115th in defensive rebounding, so it's not like they're going to kill you on the glass theoretically or something like that. So it's kind of, it's kind of like the offense, but just generally better in everything, but still not great.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest keys for, if you look at it from Michigan State's point of view, it's going to be really interesting to see how they score. I think
it's
going to be tough.
I think MSU's got to run as
much
as they possibly can, and I imagine that's going to be an emphasis from Izzo, especially with this tempo. You're not going to get a lot of possessions unless you get a bunch of offensive rebounds. So I think they're going to try to push it as much as they possibly can with Winston, with Nairn driving to the hoop. I think a huge key for MSU is they're going to have to run the ball and create more possessions and stretch this game out.
Yeah, because they're going to have – you've seen them struggle recently in the half court.
Especially against longer teams. It's going to be difficult moving the ball around the perimeter and doing what they want to do there. So I think the way you get around the slow tempo and the height and length is by running.
You got to push. I completely agree. Izzo always says he wants to push, and they've done a decent job of it this year. Especially, that's probably been the best part of Tum Tum's game. Actually, definitely has been the best part of Tum Tum's game, even though he's gotten swatted into the second deck a couple times.
But you force the pressure.
Exactly. You have to make them make the mistake. Make them make the mistake. Yeah, so it's going to be a really honestly, it shapes up as an ugly game. I don't think it'll be a very enjoyable. If you're looking for offense, go watch UCLA. If you're looking for pace, you'll see Michigan State try to do that counter, but it might end up being kind of a low scoring. It strikes me as a low scoring, ugly game.
If you're looking for pace or points, go watch Michigan, Oklahoma State.
No kidding.
At the beginning of early Friday, because that's two of the top 5 offenses in the country.
Yeah. Luckily, it'll be late in the day on St. Patrick's Day, so hopefully people will have had a couple adult beverages, and maybe that'll make this, assuming you're of age, of course, that'll make this much easier to swallow.
It's probably going to be difficult for people to stay up too.
That's true. Yeah, it is late. It's late on a Friday on the second day of a long weekend. So
in terms of Miami's players, who are you looking for?
Devon Reed is the one that jumps out at me. He's the senior. This is his last go around. He's the lead.
6'6", 220.
Yeah, and he handles the ball a lot. Plays the most minutes for them by a decent margin. He's their guy. He's their best player. I think if you can slow him down the way they did. Obviously, it's a much different challenge since he's significantly taller than Nate Mason. But if you can limit him and make him an inefficient player, that's going to take you a long ways. I do think Kamari Murphy poses a really interesting. He's 6'8",
220.
6'8", 220. So he's going to be a tough defensive matchup for Ward. He's going to be active on the boards. I have to imagine he is sort of like the Jordan Murphy role that Minnesota has. And I think a sneaky matchup that could end up coming back to bite Michigan State is the backup freshman point guard. I want to say Dejan
Vasiljevic is how I was looking at it and thinking about it. Yeah.
Okay. So he is not a tremendous three-point shooter, but in only 17 minutes a game, he does score 6 points a game. So seems to be like I look at him, but I think he's aggressive.
He's a three. I don't think he's their backup point guard because he doesn't have a good assist rate. He has taken 145 threes and 34 twos. He's a 3-point specialist.
Whether he's good at it or not, he's
only making 35% on the year. But if he's in the game, he's gonna shoot threes.
Yeah, and that's something that the backup guards for Michigan State have struggled to defend, frankly. So that's going to be, if you're looking for a deep sleeper type of guy to watch out for, the little Vasiljevic is going to be an interesting one. I don't see the bigs giving Michigan State a ton of trouble. I mean, Minnesota's had those guys. They have
neither of their true bigs play a ton, whether it's Dewan Hewell or Ibuka Izundu.
Phenomenal name.
They don't play a ton, but they shoot pretty well on twos. They're not great rebounders. So it's not a situation where it's not a Purdue. They're 6'11 and 6'10, but maybe
they're minute stealers.
Yeah, maybe they'll get some more run in a game like this, but it's not Caleb Swanigan and Isaac Haas.
No, I think if Michigan State's going to be effective, it's about making Miami inefficient. Jaquan Newton shoots less than 30% from three. It's really if you can force him into taking inefficient shots. Their guards are the ones that do all the real damage. So, that perimeter defense is going to be the outside.
Who do you think matches up with Devon Reed? 6'6", 220. Do you think that's a Miles Bridges matchup?
No, I kind of feel like Alvin Ellis, if he ends up starting at the three, would probably get the first draw because I would think Kamari Murphy, or actually don't know who starts quote unquote at center for them, whether it's Anthony Lawrence or no, he can't be it. Let's see here.
No,
I haven't watched it tonight. He's 6'7".
He's 6'7", so I'm not sure what lineups they normally play, but
so I do think Alvin Ellis probably ends up there. And Bridges would probably end up on one of the other guys who's kind of down in the front court. But, if it doesn't work, I could see them switching Bridges out there. But I would imagine Ellis gets the first call on him.
It does seem like the type of lineup where Nick Ward should not have major problems posting up on a guy. Even Izundu and Hewell aren't great at blocking. I mean, I guess Izundu does have a pretty high block rate, but it's not enough to qualify because he doesn't play a ton. But other than that, it's not something I think he's going to be overmatched with.
No, I don't see the front court being the problem. I really don't think the front court, and this is one of those very few games with Michigan State where the front court won't be. They won't really be at that much of a size disadvantage. Frankly, this one boils down to whether they can defend the perimeter and force these Miami guards into taking inefficient shots and turning the ball over. Because if they get free reign to the basket, listen, Nick Ward's been great blocking shots this season. Miles Bridges is a phenomenal weak side shot blocker, but when they have to check out, you're running at Kenny Goins, you're running at Kyle Ahrens coming in as the 4, keeping the guards out towards the perimeter and forcing them to settle for jumpers or take last second shots will be really big. So if the wing defenders can't hold their own, this game could be not fun. But if they can force them into some inefficient shots, which Miami likes to take, they've got it. This is a winnable game. We've said it so many times, but this is absolutely a winnable game for Michigan State.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's pretty much it's possible. I think MSU should have some success inside. It's going to come down to how they play on the perimeter, and especially defensively. And for much of the year, they have not played well defensively on the perimeter. So, and
they can't turn the ball over offensively.
Yeah,
they really can't. I mean, this is the tournament.
And it's a slow team. Every turnover is going to hurt that much more because it's gonna shorten the game.
This has a chance to be one of those down in this, in the second half, the last 10 minutes of this game, if it's close, could take an hour and a half because of how slow they like to play. And if you turn the ball over, it's like every possession is going to be absolute agony. So, bring the Pepto-Bismol, probably. Get ready for that stomach ache down the stretch.
If MSU wins and plays Sunday, are you available to do podcasts before then?
I am not going to be available, so pray for me. But I'll be on a bachelor party this weekend, from Thursday through Sunday. So even if I was available, you wouldn't want me here.
It's possible. I may get Adam Ruff on again, or
get Adam or Matt. I'm sure,
or a new TOC writer, Matt Sheehan. Maybe Saturday. If Austin is not available.
Ironically, I'll actually be in Fort Lauderdale, right near Miami. So I'll be cautious with wearing my Michigan State stuff.
Well, I was gonna say if they win or something.
Right. I'll be cautious.
So I guess looking ahead for your purposes, if MSU were to win, do you give them any chance against Kansas?
It's tough to really be terribly optimistic about that. I wouldn't rule them all the way out, though. I think the Josh Jackson factor would absolutely play into that emotionally. I think, the Spartan players, whether they want to admit it or not, are probably a little upset that he didn't come to play with them and instead chose to go to Kansas. So the chance at revenge is all the mental edge you could need. But, Kansas' best players are two of the more electric guards in the country. And the thought of, Cassius Winston trying to check Frank Mason is a little dicey. I do think that Nick Ward would have a decent time on the inside against Landon Lucas, and Michigan State would be able to hang in. I don't know that they'd get blown out. They've played really tough teams all season, and I think that would come back to help them. But I have a tough time seeing them beating Kansas. So I'll be rooting for the 16 seed before that.
Yeah, and actually they'll be playing a first four team, so you can get a potential look at MSU's second round opponent.
Yeah. Tune in. Four. True TV.
All right, so we didn't actually give a pick. MSU Miami, what's your pick?
Oh man. I'm gonna end up picking Michigan State because I don't think Miami does one thing well enough to force MSU out of their game. I don't think Miami is going to beat Michigan State in this game. If they win, it'll be Michigan State beating themselves. I will pick MSU. Do I have to give a score?
Yeah, sure.
64-60.
I was just gonna flip the 10-pound score and go 62-61 MSU. He's got Miami. So I mean, it's basically a toss-up game there. I think it comes down to if MSU can run and that's what they're going to do. So
win the turnover battle.
Yeah, don't turn it over and just run and don't play terrible defense on the perimeter, which is
seems doable.
Kind of a lot to ask for with this team. But who knows? So rest of the bracket. I haven't even really looked, although I did fill out. It's probably too late now at this time you're listening, but Dan's pick 16 is always a fun tournament he does. Yeah. It's not a bracket, but you pick based on seeds and you get points based on their wins, based on their seed. But who do you have you done a bracket and a Final Four yet?
I did. I just filled it out today for the first time, which I think is a personal record.
I've not gone through it all the way yet, but I did look at it and get a Final Four. So who are you for?
My Final Four are fairly chalk, but I feel pretty good about it. I might just end up looking like a complete idiot after this. But out of the East, I have Duke. I have Duke beating Villanova to get to the Final Four. Then out of the West, I have Arizona beating Gonzaga to get to the Final Four. The Midwest, I have, this is going to look bad. I have Louisville beating Kansas to get to the Final Four. And in the South, I have North Carolina beating Kentucky. So I have 1-2 in all of the Elite Eight, which is just terribly unimaginative. But I think the top 8 seeds in this year's bracket just stand out above everybody else by a pretty decent margin.
I thought that last year, and then Syracuse made the Final Four. So
it's a really good point.
I've got Kansas over Louisville in the Midwest, like you.
I have Louisville.
Oh, my bad. Okay, I got Kansas there. UCLA over North Carolina in the South.
I like it.
I like their offense. I think they're kind of underseeded at 3, and they already beat Kentucky once this year. So.
Yep.
And on the other side, Arizona over Gonzaga in the West, and SMU over Villanova in the East. I think SMU has been very, very overlooked because of where they play, but that's a very good team.
It is.
And Baylor, I can never trust in the tournament, which is their second round game. Duke is very hot and cold. I could see them winning that. And then Villanova, I know they won the national championship last year, but still don't always trust them. And it's a team that still relies on, I believe, a lot of three-point shooting. And it's kind of guard-centric. So I think SMU is a lot better than they're seeded at 6. So that's a 6 in SMU, a 2 in Arizona, a 3 at UCLA, and a 1 in Kansas.
I like that. So much more imagination than I have.
So I've got a Kansas-Arizona national championship in Arizona because Final Four is in Phoenix. And, man, I don't totally trust Arizona, but I think at home-ish I'll go with Arizona to win the championship.
All right. So I have Arizona beating Duke. Louisville beating UNC, and then I also have Arizona winning the whole thing. That's kind of funny. I'm bullish on Louisville, though. I got to say, I was very close to picking them to beat Arizona. They have such a good combination of length, and they struggle to score a little bit, but when it comes down to the tournament and these tough games that come down to the wire all the time, that press and trap and that size down low, they're going to win a lot of rebounding battles on the offense and the defense. And I just think they can kind of match up versatilely with anybody. And that press is just such a nightmare to have to deal with. I like them. I almost picked them to beat Arizona, but I watched way too much. I have a roommate who is a UCLA guy, and so I watched a lot of this Pac-12 tournament, and I ended up watching Arizona. I've watched them several times throughout the year, but, man, they look tough to beat right now. They're a good team.
They look a lot different than they did at the beginning of the season when
MSU
lost to them on a buzzer beater. MSU, I mean, we forget MSU nearly beat them.
Yep.
In the very first game.
It would be nice to have on the resume right about now, but it looks like a pretty good team.
Here's the thing with Louisville. If Michigan can get past Oklahoma State, which is a tough matchup, I think Michigan can match up quite well with Louisville because I think they can handle a press. They destroyed VCU a few years ago. They've got that style with Beeline and the versatile big men who can move and shoot. And I think they've got a style that can beat Louisville. The thing with Michigan is such a there's like 2 different ways people think they can go. They can lose in the beginning because they were going on adrenaline in the Big Ten tournament, or they're so hot that they go all the way like UConn winning the national championship. I don't know what's going to happen.
That's a stretch, but
hey, who the hell? UConn won the championship. That's like a.
You're absolutely right.
Weren't they an 8 seed or something with Shabazz Napier?
Yeah, I think they were a 7. They beat
us.
They could. I mean, they've got a tough road. That's
the thing. I think that's a very tough road.
bracket between Louisville, Oregon, Kansas.
And even Oklahoma State.
Yeah, Oklahoma State's no slouch either.
The number 1 offense in the country, the number 2 offense in the Ken Pom era since 2003. That's a tough team too.
I didn't even realize that.
And then after that, I don't think Creighton's that good, but Oregon I think should handle that part pretty well. And then you possibly got Kansas in the or MSU, or we could get an MSU Michigan Elite 8 game.
Oh, geez, can you imagine?
Can you imagine?
I don't know if I even want to think about it.
I remember in 2014
covering
I covered the games at Madison Square Garden when both MSU and Michigan were in the Elite Eight because Michigan was playing Kentucky. And I remember all like leading into that day, like the buzz was like, could MSU and Michigan both be in the Final Four? They wouldn't have faced in the Final Four that year. But they would have both been there. And everyone was like waiting for it, and then they both lose heartbreakers.
I remember getting premature panic attacks just
thinking
about
wait. Well, has there ever been a greater relief for MSU fans than when, I think it was Aaron Harrison hit the three late to beat Michigan right after MSU lost to UConn?
Only one, and it was when Peyton Siva didn't get called for that block against Trey Burke.
Well,
and ended up winning the national championship.
Well, I mean, at the time you didn't know that, but as soon as Michigan lost, I think a lot of I talked to a lot of MSU fans who basically said after, like it sucks that MSU didn't get to the Final Four, but it could have been even worse if they had lost and then Michigan had gone.
Oh, that would have been very bad. I had premature panic attacks thinking about the stress level that my body. I don't think I could handle it. Between a Michigan State national championship game would have been the absolute end of me.
That was like, I can't imagine what that Louisville Kentucky Final Four game a few years ago must have been.
Oh my gosh, that must have been wild. Well, I mean, look, it's funny. One of my buddies picked UNC Duke. I don't think that's an outlandish championship game this year. Can you? I mean, think about that. That's like the rivalry almost. That's one of the best rivalries in all sports. And man, that would be no fun at all.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I appreciate everybody listening along. Make sure you check out Austin's preview stuff on theoilcolors.com. More detail than we talked about here. Again, Friday night around 9:15 Eastern, TNT. If MSU wins, I'll try to get another podcast up before the Kansas game. If not, we will talk to you next week post MSU loss and the season's over, or miraculous Sweet 16 run.
Right.
And so I guess we'll see where that goes from there. So appreciate you guys for listening, and we will talk to you sometime. See you.